Welcome, everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone to this ninth lecture in the Chua lecture series. Today, we're going to find out everything that we wanted to know about complexity, but we're too intimidated to ask. And therefore, we have a wonderful guide on this journey. And let's welcome Leon.
Thank you. Good morning. I promise you that at the end of my talk, you are not going to be intimidated anymore. You'll find complexity will be so trivial. Yeah. Okay. Most of you probably have seen over the last 20 years or many books about complexity. Some of them, the world is on the cover, others may not be, but they're all about the same thing. And these are not from ordinary authors. Many of them are Nobel Prize winners, like these four guys, and there are many more. They are luminaries, really. So I've got, Frodinger and others. That they're all very well-known people, and so this is the area that has attracted a great deal of interest, and in particular, Stephen Hawking was asked in the turn of the century and said what he thinks the most important things going to happen, and he said it's complexity. Okay, so what is complexity? And it turned out that this is actually an interesting buzzword. The easiest thing is to ask what is not complexity. And so imagine that some guy coming out in the left corner of the room with his cappuccino, where the audience is pretty sleepy, and he walked to the front, and eventually in a short period of time, everybody wakes up. And that's because the coffee molecules have sort of spread out and become homogeneous. And the whole point is become homogeneous. If you take a sample at any point where you'll find the same number of average number here, becomes homogeneous. So one never sees the diffused aromatic coffee molecules return to a cluster at the lower left corner as when the professor just walked in. Okay, and same thing, you see all kinds of experience. You make a cocktail, and after you mix up the ingredient, eventually everything becomes homogeneous. That's what you expect, okay? So the evolution toward a homogeneous, steady state is in fact the hallmark of the second law of thermodynamics. All of you, know about the second law. And unfortunately, the second law of thermodynamics predicts a really boring, lifeless, and featureless scenario for closed, isolated system. Something like you see everything uniform, homogeneous. There's no information, not interesting, okay? But nature, in fact, is full of non-homogeneous patterns, widely discussed under the seductive topic called complexity. All these books I'm talking about, all these thousands of papers, they're all about non-homogeneous patterns. So second law is out of question. It's useless, okay? And Nobel winner likes to say that one of the most interesting aspects of the world is that it can be considered as to be made of patterns. Okay? So what is a pattern? In fact, it's very simple. It's just any inhomogeneous feature in a homogeneous media composed of identical cells is a pattern. So typically you have, the interesting here, you have a collection of identical, it doesn't have to be, but identical makes it even more interesting. Because you don't expect things that are identical to give you something that's different, that's inhomogeneous, and that's what called pattern, something that stands out. Okay, and now I'm going to flash you many things that we'll come back later on. So how does a leopard get its spot? You pick a part of the skin under the black spot or under the yellow region. Look under the microscope, and you will see they're exactly identical. There's no reason why one cell would be black, the other would be yellow. Okay, and look at the tail. It's got these black bands. As this pet, it's interesting. Look at the band, and the whole end is no longer the spots. And this is not true just for leopards, for lions, all kinds of animals. And I will come back to this, but I just want to call your attention that this is interesting. So look at the tiger. Why is the end are bands and not stripes anymore? Okay, and there are all kinds of pattern like stripes on this frog. That these are stripes, spots, and the zebra has patches, and you have zebra with stripes, but I want to call your attention that some of these typically have these tuning fork things that are either opening up wall or down wall. I'm going to come back later to all these kind of patterns, okay? And again, you have a frog, and you got, this time, instead of spots, you got these stripes, okay? Well, clearly, if you have the same frog that have completely different patterns, it should be, the reason why they exist, it's got to be not so important, okay? And so we have insects, all kinds of patterns in nature. And if you heat up in a little dish of water or some liquid, depending on what the initial condition you see, it forms stripes, either in one direction or the other. It all depends on the initial condition. And we're going to show you later that this is all reproducible with my theory here. Now, here's the desert, famous desert in India. And what's for those tuning fork patterns again? See, and the reason I'm showing all this is that this kind of pattern occurs everywhere, and they're from totally unrelated scenarios. So there is no reason why anyone should expect that there is a single theory. I mean that you can use physics or chemistry to try to explain this thing. It will be nonsense because this occurs in all things. There must be a more generous way to explain it. These are hexagon from your cornea, but if you look, our cornea is transparent, but if you look under the microscope, you see they're made of hexagons, okay? And these are honeycombs, they're hexagons, okay? And these are again heating the liquid. You can have either hexagon or stripe, depending on the initial condition for the same system, okay? And there are more hexagons again, and I'm showing all real things. These are not simulation. This is the sunset over some landscape in Nepal. You can see there are big hexagons, okay? And this is a causeway. How many of you have been to North Ireland? There's a famous causeway, and all this tube thing, strange formation. If you cut through a section, you see they're all hexagons, okay? And then if you have a dish of say, red liquid, and then say oil, and you pump at the center, pump water down there, exactly from center, so exactly symmetrical. So why would you expect, put the something symmetrical, expect something to be uniform, and yet you get something like that? What's the reason for that? These are dendrites, right? And how about this picture? How many of you can recognize this picture? What is it? Anyone? Well, these are dendrites too, okay? But it looks like a tree, but it's not a tree, and it's actually the Delta of Colorado River. I just want to make a point is that this sort of thing occurs everywhere. It's totally unrelated. And so you should not expect that if you're a physicist that you can use physics to explain this, or if you have chemistry, you say you can use chemistry, okay? And because whatever you derive could not be the explanation. These are all static patterns, but we can make dynamics as well. Well, the simplest way is to make a cocktail. This is the famous Belousov-Zabotensky, known now as BZ reaction. Don't worry about what liquid there, sulfuric acid, something that you wouldn't drink, of course, but you put them together just like you make a cocktail. You would normally expect them to end up with some uniform color, but not in this case. This is called a BZ reaction. Depending on by the way, if you really want to do that, this is the formula, so you can actually do that at, on your free time. It turned out that in this case, you started with, say, a red color, and 18 seconds, almost exactly 18 seconds later, you get blue. 18 seconds become red, and it just continues. It's a clock, okay? It's no longer homogeneous. It's a dynamic clock, okay? But you started again with just common mixture of liquids, okay? And for exactly the same cocktail, depending on initial condition, on the bottom you see those concentric patterns. This is just a snapshot in time. This is now dynamic. This thing is growing, like it's a wave. On top you can see this spiral. So we got now the first real example. These are not simulation. These are real pictures of circular wave or spiral wave. And a circular wave, by the way, is called the target wave And the first people doing this research thought that this looks like, when you shoot pattern, shoot in a carnival, and so that it looks like target. They call it target wave. That's actually the name people use, target wave, okay? And or concentric wave, which make more sense. So these are more pictures of spiral waves and target wave. Now this is a real example. Turns out that what you're seeing here is a enlarged version of amoeba. All those white part are amoeba moving. The black part are the amoeba that are not moving. And what happened with amoeba is very interesting. When amoebas eat bacteria, so when you have a lot of food, they will multiply. You have tons of amoeba, and then they will run out of food. When they run out of food, some amoeba begin to spit out. So when they are happy with the food, everybody is independent. Okay, but when they run out of food, some of these amoeba begin to spit out some chemicals, and this chemical. So we're looking at the CNN. You have a collection of amoeba suddenly. When they run out of food, they would generate this, spit out those chemicals, and that becomes the coupling. Okay, so we are looking. All of these things, you should realize these are all CNN. They're a collection of cells that have coupling. Okay, and now, so this is the life cycle of the amoeba. First, on the top left, starting from the top left, you have tons of them eating with the bacteria. They multiply, and then they run out of food. And when that happens, some amoeba begin to spit out chemical, and they begin to form. This chemical is the coupling, and that coupling form into a spiral wave. So this is an example of real spiral wave. Okay, and the reason for that is to attract the stationary amoeba to say, come here to get together. Eventually, the next cycle they form into a body, and all the way up they have the stalk and stuff, and then they have the spores, and finally the spores will just pop up, and then you'll be on the air, and you'll fall somewhere in the leg or somewhere where there may be a lot of bacteria again, and they multiply. That's the life cycle. But the whole point is it goes through this spiral wave cycle. Okay. So if you were a botanist or somebody studying or zoology, you would have a totally different theory. You would think this is mysterious. How does the spiral wave come from? If you were a chemist looking at a BG reaction, this is a chemist. They would be using chemistry. They said, how to explain that? I'm telling you that it cannot be the correction because of course it's everywhere else. If you have a theory based on chemistry, it's not going to apply to the amoeba or vice versa. Here is the jellyfish. The way they prepare service through this spiral wave, as you can see. So, and spiral wave, in fact, can be deadly as well. So far, these are all useful things for the living organism. But on November 12, 2001, American Airlines Flight 587 took off from JFK, and minutes later, it broke up and dropped into the ground. Okay, and after years of investigation, they found out that there were 747 just took off before that, and 747 had generated so much, turbulence, it formed spiral waves. By the way, after this, they have spaced out the 747 so that this situation doesn't fall anymore. So you have a longer waiting time, for example. So see all this spiral is created. So this is again all of these waves. Target waves are called auto waves by the Russians. They were the first people to study, so they call it autonomous waves, okay? Because there is no input. So auto waves, in fact, are nonlinear waves which propagate at the expense of energy extracted from active medium. And the shape, and this is important, the shape and amplitude of an auto wave remains constant during propagation, unlike electromagnetic wave. You need this station to amplify it every now your cell phone, because it deteriorates. Not so for auto wave. The shape and amplitude remains the same. When the auto wave encounters inhomogeneities or boundaries, there is no reflection. Again, it's totally different from electromagnetic wave. Totally different stage from ocean wave. When ocean wave hit the wall, it's going to flash back, right? Well, this is not going to happen. I'm going to show you more examples. And two colliding auto waves would annihilate, and then each other, and unlike again electromagnetic. So, for example, On the left side is the classical wave, electromagnetic wave or sound wave or whatever. And when they collided, they would interfere because of the phase shape, phase differences. Whereas on the right side, when the two auto waves collided, you can see they just disappear. There were no reflection, no interference patterns. They're totally different things. This is typical that all of you know about interference pattern in electromagnetic wave, interference pattern. And this is the trivial version of the auto wave where this keep going on. In fact, if you have something like go all the way to the moon, it will still be going on. They will never diminish, just keep going on. And that's what an auto wave is. So now, because of all of this very interesting phenomena and pattern, static and dynamic, there were all kinds of and this were not intentional. I'm sure these were good intention, good scientists, but they were from different walks of life. They were from chemistry, economics, physics, astronomy. They see this wonderful different phenomena and excited about it, try to develop theory, and they have to find a name for it. So this way, this name came about: complexity, emergence, self-organization, synergetics, non-equilibrium phenomena, collective behaviors, slaving principles, dissipative structure, cooperative phenomena, order from disorder, autopoietic phenomena, endogenous, and there are many more. I just show you a thing. And this is where I came in about 30 years. I was so frustrated. I said, gee, this is fantastic. I have this wonderful phenomenon. How am I going to ever have time to learn all of this thing? I was intimidated. That's why I put it in my title. I'm truly intimidated. And so I started, after some studying, I read many of these books. I started to ask them, what do these words have in common? Okay, they were from all walks of life, all profession. Well, I was so shocked that the answer is they have no definitions. That's the thing in common. It's incredible. You got Nobel Prize winners writing books about it, and they don't have a definition at all. Okay, that was the problem. Okay. And I'm going to show you a real example. Everybody knows Gell-Mann, okay, the quant guy. And he published a wonderful book. Again, and you can see it's about complexity, the simple and the complex. I'm going to quote one page, page 99. And see that one paragraph, he used the word self-organized, emergent, complex, self-organized 4 times. So because he didn't have a definition for each word, so he's using one undefined word to define another undefined word. Okay? And of course, we have a word for that. We call that tautology. You use an undefined term to define another undefined term. Okay? And this is just aside. It turned out that this happened even in real life. How many of you know Justice Potter Stewart? He was one of the really distinguished judges in the Supreme Court. He was once asked in a very famous case having to do with pornography, and the opposing team, tried to trick him. He said, "Your Honor, what is your definition of pornography? We've been fighting for this case. He said about to make a major decision." And Stewart, by the way, that's him. If you didn't know him, a very famous justice. But he was off guard, and so it's a slip. But he said, "I don't need a definition. I know it when I see it." And of course, this suggests the slip suggests something about his viewing habits. Okay. Okay. So I've been complaining about a lack of definition. I better give you one. Because if you don't have a definition, how can you develop a theory? How can you derive any equation, right? And it's silly. I mean, all of this wonderful, in Nobel Prize, they don't have a definition, so they could not have a theory. It is all anecdotes. Okay. So this is the purpose of my talk today, is to show you that there is a way to understand this whole thing. Okay, and so I have to give you a definition. Otherwise, I'll be just one of them. Well, the definition is trivial. After you see all this thing, complexity is defined as the emergence of a heterogeneous pattern on a homogeneous media. That's all. If you want to talk about complexity, you only have to show me that you can write equation, and you can show that you have a homogeneous media, and that you can, under certain initial condition, you can produce a pattern. If you can show that, you have complexity, and then you can derive the theorem and say what are the conditions for different cells. So we're not talking about CNN, okay? You have a collection of cells, then you can see and the coupling, and to tell you in advance, it turned out that the only requirement you have to have complexity, to have any of this pattern, is that the cells, all the interconnect must be locally active. This is why we're leading to the next talk, which is finally you've been hearing local activity and edge of chaos for so many times. We're finally going to get it next week, okay? And this is to show you more about, okay? Now, let's go back to historical, go back to Boltzmann. By the way, this is the famous tombstone. If you go to Venice, go to the Central Library and Cemetery, you're going to see it. And by the way, most of you probably know that Boltzmann, he was the originator of the signal of thermodynamics, of entropy, for example. But he was not recognized, and he actually committed suicide, you know, completely desperate. And this tombstone was erected by physicists who later realized how great he was to honor him. And this is the famous law, S equal to K log W, is on top of the tombstone. Okay, well, the reason I start with him is that Boltzmann actually realized that the second law has severe limitation because he knew that this doesn't apply to anything living. He said in 1886 that the general struggle for existence of animate being is a struggle for entropy. He realized that the second law said the entropy must increase. So how are you going to ever get pattern? You got to be able to get negative, something that doesn't increase. He didn't use the word negative entropy, but Schrodinger, 30 years later, you know, published this wonderful book that I believe most of you have read. And this is a wonderful little book, as I said, and even Watson, the famous DNA Nobel Prize winner, I like to say that Watson has often said that the decisive influence on him, on the DNA discovery, was the book What is Life by the physicist Schrodinger. So Schrodinger, aside from being a great physicist, toward the latter part, was beginning to think about life. What is life? Okay, and for example, I caught one of his sentences, and Schrodinger says, "What does a living organism? How does a living organism avoid decay?" The second law says it has to decay, right? So he said, of course, by eating, drinking, and breathing. The technical term is metabolism. And the Greek word means to exchange. So he said, exchange for what? So Schrodinger had to invent a word. He said, what an organism feeds upon is negative entropy, or negentropy is the name that he had coined. Okay? 30 years later, Prigogine came back and continue the struggle. And he said that biological, he said the same thing, but more technical. He said biological order manifests itself by a series of structures of growing complexity. This is contrary to the second law of thermodynamics of isolated system, which leads simply to the state of maximum disorder when things become homogeneous, on average, okay? So he said, should we then introduce some new principle of nature, such as the instability of homogeneous? So he realized, as well as all of them realized, you need something new principle. They just don't know what it is. And Schrodinger say, okay, it's got to be maybe something, call it the instability of homogeneous, because if you have something that's identical, symmetry says that you have to be homogeneous. So and that clearly is one solution. So why are you not saying that homogeneity? It's because that became unstable. So he got the right insight. So he called it instability homogeneous. Okay, so Boltzmann, to summarize what I'm just saying, Boltzmann essentially, came up with conclusion that the only way you could explain complexity or life is that entropy must decrease. Schrodinger say you need negative entropy. Prigogine say you need instability of the homogeneous. Gell-Mann say you need something more. You need to be able to amplify small fluctuations. We're going to come back next week to continue with his statement, amplification of fluctuations, okay? And Turing, now he's now a mathematician, all of you know the father of computer, but he published one very influential paper, and this is it. We're going to talk about it next week as well. He said the characteristic of complexity is that you have to destabilize with dissipation, totally counterintuitive, you know. You try to dissipate things by finding something that is dissipated to interact with. So to summarize what I've just said, the current sexy research area called complexity has no definition, no theory, no foundation. It's just a mixed bag of jargons and anecdotes. Okay, so complexity is therefore currently a hard, multidisciplinary without a foundation. So I would say that it's time for the complexity community to get the acts together. By the way, the reason there are so many people working on this is because there's money around, university establishing institutes of complexity everywhere, because that is how one way to get money, okay, research money. But to be honest, let's get back, summarize Schrodinger, Prigogine, Eigen. These are all Nobel Prize winners except Turing and Smell. Gell-Mann, and then Turing, mathematician, Smell, another mathematician that you have met last time, have all been searching for a missing new physical principle. They all knew that something is missing, okay? And I'm telling you now, the missing new principle is called local activity, and it's called the edge of chaos, which is next week's lecture. Okay, so let me move on since we are a bit so I'm going to talk about complexity now, and this is the book that I'm telling you we're actually going to contain much of what I'm going to say now. So let's start with so everything is CNN because you have a collection of cells, and as such the cell doesn't have to be identical, but make it more impressive, because if the cells are not identical, then you can say, of course, there is a pattern already. The point is we make them, they're identical. So you should not, a solution is obvious one, is that everything should be the same because they're identical, And the only reason you can get something that's not identical, that's not homogeneous, is that the correct solution happens to be unstable. So Prigogine is correct. The reason you have pattern is because the one solution that is a solution is unstable. Okay, and they typically have to interact, because if they are all separated, then there's no problem, right? And you wouldn't have any pattern. The point is they're interacting, but the interesting is they typically interact only within a sphere of influence. Okay, with the nearest neighbor or the next layer of neighbor, and maybe next. Okay, not much more, and that's enough. Okay, so and it can be, it doesn't have to be a cube. I just make a cube for simplicity. It could be just any surface, and the obvious solution for that, because the cells are identical, it will be just all one color. Okay, or it could be another shape. The correct solution should be all one color. And the only reason you're going to have different color is because there are some property of the cells, and they are all the coupling, and that property is have to be locally active. And the good news is that, unlike most of all the other books, there is no, their base case philosophy. I have the formula and tell you how to massage the parameters so that you can make them locally active. That's why this is a really deep, important theory here. Okay, it's not philosophy. It's something constructive. You can do it. Okay, so if it's locally active, you can get spiral web. The earlier one is just to is you have static pattern or you can have dynamic pattern. They're all the same, not different. They all have, as long as your cells are locally active, you're going to be able to get these things. So I call this the CNN paradigm. And what is that? By choosing appropriate locally active cells, a CNN is capable of exhibiting all manifestation of complexity, of all the intimidating words I've talked about, okay? By the way, including the famous Wolfram's book, A New Kind of Science. How many of you have heard of the book, New Kind of Science by Stephen Wolfram? Well, quite a few. Well, this will be our last lecture. So you're going to see that Wolfram also didn't realize it. So we're going to come back. So the whole thing is really all related. It's all about local activity, okay? It's about CNN. So now we're going to go back to a CNN, except that in this case, we don't have a B. Remember the CNN that I defined here. You have the A template that you feed back, and then you have the input, the B template. But the whole point here now is that there is no input. Okay, otherwise it wouldn't be interesting. You know, nobody's driving anything. There's no input. How can you have a solution, right? So we therefore consider a case where you have no input, no B template, only A template. Okay, otherwise it's the same equation. And you have seen already a lecture about all kinds of things you can do with just a 3x3 A template. And now, for today, to get all of this interesting thing, we make 5x5. So that's the only difference. So the Toshiba chip wouldn't work here because the Toshiba chip is just 3x3. Okay, we're going to have to 5x5, but that's all you need. Okay, the equation is the same. The cell is exactly the same cell. Okay, so that's and it's so simple. It's incredible. You look at the cell, it's so simple. You would never expect that it can do anything interesting, right? You know, but just by picking the parameter, the A template, we're going to see what we can do. Here is A template. In fact, this is so interesting. Here's one A template. There are that you can pick, but this is just one. It's 5x5, but I'm going to fix all the 25 parameters plus the B is 0. Remember, there's no input, and there's a threshold Z. I'm going to only tune the center parameter of A template and the threshold Z. Tune 2 parameters. In fact, I'm going to keep everything else the same, just to show you that this is complexity. It's so easy, you know. I mean, you don't need any special effort. And I'm going to just massage these two numbers, and to show you that I get everything. In fact, that you have seen. Okay. So let's start with minus 24.2, and then with a threshold of 1.2. With that, you can. This is now simulation. You can see that I just show. I highlight the one in mirror. That's the hexagon. If you look at, they're all hexagon. Okay. So, and this of course is an example of the honeycomb. They're all hexagon. So I can produce hexagon with that one template. But for that same template, remember it was the threshold is 1.2. I'm going to keep the same template that will produce a hexagon, but making that threshold 0. Okay. And now what happened? If you make that 0, suddenly you don't get hexagon, but you get a whole bunch of stripes like that, like the stripe you see on the animal skin that shown earlier. And I want you to remember this slide because we're going to come back later on to this slide with that template. And remember, that is the same template for hexagon, okay? Except that you now have a 0 threshold. Just by that, you get a different pattern. And note, I want you to pay attention also that this number I'm saying is very tiny, small. Remember, we're in the age of chaos in other words. And typically, you have a very small window to massage things. It's quite amazing. All the interesting thing happens in that little small window, what I call the Goldilocks zone, okay? And now, change it slightly to minus 23.25. Just go back. You can see this is 24.2, tiny bit. Okay. Now I'm going to adjust the threshold all the way from 0 to just to 1, just to see what happened. Okay. And if you do that for 0, start with 0, you will get. Typically, you start with, to make things interesting, you start with 0 initial condition. The left is just a random pattern. You put in the random pattern in and let it evolve in time. And when you set it out to steady state, you get a static pattern that look like squiggles, something that you see in some animal skins, for example, okay? And now if I go back to 0, it's interesting, by the way. Now I'm going to pick minus 23.25. And this is interesting because on the left, you have 3 experiments. They're all from that disk that you saw earlier. And this is a favorite experiment that physicists, especially those who are working in fluid dynamics, they're all familiar with this because they look at that disk and they hit below it, and they want to predict what happened, and they have to solve a kind of Navier-Stokes equation. Amazing thing. You need a supercomputer to do this. Those 3 patterns on the left are obtained by supercomputer. You know, immense amount of work. And it's the same setup, except that the top row are the initial condition, the initial pattern. Instead of all random, you have this red, you know, on slanted way, and then the cross. With those 3 initial conditions, it evolved into the 3 different rows, as you can see below. So this confirmed that the physicists are very happy. The fluid dynamics say they can produce a phenomena. Therefore, they think they have a big deal, right? They discovered something, okay, because they can do that. and it's deep theory. You need Navier-Stokes equation kind of thing. Well, we have a CNN. The same template, just changing a little bit in the center, and you get something on the right. Same initial condition on top. I think you will agree that they pretty much the same thing. So this to show you that you don't need. It's not the Navier-Stokes equation that is responsible for this pattern. It must be something much more basic. Okay, and now I'm going to show you something interesting. We're going to still have the same template. And I'm going and we record that the parameter z, the thread can adjust. So as you adjust from 0 to 1, you see that the pattern can change. So you begin to see that how you get these different animal pattern just by changing the one number and by a very small amount. Okay, and now let's go back to this wonderful example I showed you earlier. I told you that if you go to I'm sure most of you didn't realize it because I didn't, but now I'm telling you, if you go to the zoo next time, watch for these tigers and the different animals and look at the tail. You'll see that they all eventually become rings toward the end. It tapers. Remember, the tail, the character tape, it tapers down. It's not a rectangle anymore. Okay, whereas all these other examples have been rectangle or square. Well, it turns out that for exactly the same template, you don't even change any number, don't change any threshold. For exactly the same thing, you suddenly get something what I just shown on the right. I think you all agree that this is basically a good approximation of what you see in the animal tail. And the biologists have spent years trying to understand how can these animal tails have this suddenly change pattern, and when you get to the tail, it became a ring. They were looking for some deep principle. It turned out that there is no deep principle. The deep principle is just simple mathematics. It's just that instead of rectangle, it's now a trapezoid. That's the only difference. Okay, it's just all mathematics. It's a different boundary, and you get these patterns. Okay, so now for changing the center number slightly, again a little bit, a tiny bit, you now suddenly get this pattern on top. The left tuning fork opening and the right opening tuning fork, and so now you can see the angel fish on the upper right, toward the tail you have the right tuning fork. On the lower bottom, the middle, you have the left tuning fork, and the Sahara pattern. Remember, so all of this, is reproducible by one example. And now this is a final example. We tune the parameter now to 21. Right? So we started from -24. So we have very small tuning region, and we've seen all of these different patterns already, including the tail. Now, for this one, we start with, I'm going to give you the snapshots at different time. At T0, let's put a little cross at the center as the initial condition, and let it evolve. And I'm showing you the snapshots. I can see that it goes left and right, and T to 28 begin to develop a dendrite. And indeed, as you continue, by 96, you have a dendrite. Okay, and these are dendrites, and I was just like the snowflakes. Okay, these are dendrites, and of course, some of you say, but wait a minute, this is not a snowflake. How can you call that a snowflake? Yeah, it is a dendrite, all right, but it's not. How can I compare that with the real snowflake, which has a 6-4 symmetry, whereas the dendrite that I claim is only a 4-4 symmetry. Well, my answer of comparing with the mundane snow that you see is that you go to Mars with your carbon dioxide. It turns out the carbon dioxide snowflake has 4-4 symmetry. You would have exactly seen what I've just shown you. Okay, and so those are snowflakes, carbon dioxide snowflake from Mars. Now I'm going to show you something interesting. How many of you have seen this little creature? This is called Hydra. Okay, it is a little tiny animal that you find in the lakes. Well, Hydra is interesting. That it's a small animal capable of self-repair. You cut off a Hydra's head, a new head will be grown. You cut off the Hydra's leg, a new leg will be drawn. That's well known. So this is a caricature. You have a Hydra on the left. You cut it in the bottom, the top, and the bottom, where the top is going to grow a tail. and the bottom is going to go ahead. That's what a hydra is. Well, we actually have a CNN. I didn't have enough time to show you that actually we do the same thing. For example, it's a one-dimensional CNN with a simple template. You can produce this phenomena. Okay, and now recall early on I showed you about this hexagonal template with a 0 threshold, and instead of getting hexagon, you would get stripes. Now I'm going to demonstrate that there's another property here, and that is imagine that this is part of your skin of some hypothetical animal, and I'm going to cut the hole out of that skin, like and see that that you can repel itself. So with the same template, I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to create a hole. Okay. Now that hole is the blue hole there, and then just going to say go. With exactly the same template, you can see the evolution. It repels itself. Eventually, you get back the original. That's self-repair. Okay. It's the same template. So all of this thing is not mysterious anymore. It's just the mathematics. It's completely understandable because mathematics cannot fool you. Okay. Just like the leopard tail, if I did show you that, you wouldn't believe me, but that's, I didn't even change the template. I just changed the geometry of the boundary. Okay, so, and let's summarize. All what I've shown you here is that from hexagon to stripe to tuning fork to dendrite to even self-repair, the parameter range that I adjust is tiny. Okay, this is why I call this Goldilocks zone. And this is very typical of this. These are all in edge of chaos region. Okay. Now let's switch now to another example. To CNN. So far, all of this is a standard CNN that you have seen all along, the Toshiba CNN, except that we have a 5x5 neighborhood. Now let's get a second CNN. Remember, CNN is just any collection of cells that are locally coupled to each other. So this is the local coupling. Now it's just a grid of resistors. You've seen that early on already. Now let's continue that episode here. So now the cells are through a circuit. Okay, you've seen that already last time. And instead of creating chaos, I'm just going to change some parameter to make it display other behavior. One of the interesting behavior is for some parameters, you see a plane wave. This is a line, imagine a line of CNN here, coupled by a resistor, okay? And you have only 22 cells, from 1 to 22. The other direction is time. So you can see that this is a plane wave that would be moving over time, and eventually the last cell, 22, has the wave. The waveform will keep propagating, and it takes time. So this is a standard. This is the most trivial kind of wave propagation. This is an auto wave. It triggers from 0 and then boom, But it propagates over from 1 to 22. Okay, that's the simplest kind. Then you have seen already the target wave, the next complex, and then this is a snapshot of the evolution of a target wave. From one seat at the center, it evolves to that next one, lower left and right back, and then this scheme will just keep repeating itself. When it hits the boundary, it just disappears. It doesn't flash back like water, okay? But it keeps repeating and repeating. That's why it's a wave. Same thing. You've seen this spiral wave. That's the initial pattern, and there's the evolution over time. You see how it forms, okay? And then when it hits the boundary, it just disappears, and it keep going on and on, spirals. Now interestingly, let's go back to this plane wave that I showed you earlier. Remember the plane wave that I just showed a moment ago? It eventually would spread all the way to cell number 22, so that it really propagates. But what I'm showing you here is for some parameter, the diffusion. I mean, if you make the resistor source too large, suddenly it gets only about 10. I mean, about maybe 5 or 6, and then it stops. It no longer propagates anymore. We call that propagation failure. Now, this is very interesting. If you imagine that line is an axon, okay? It means that for some parameters, your axon may no longer propagate. And And this is significant, and I'm going to tell you how many of you knew Mucius? You don't? Well, he's a famous guy. If you next time go to LA, go to the Getty Museum. You see there's a display. In fact, there's even a section called Mucius, on the frame, and you go to the Louvre Museum in Paris, or you go to Rome, go to the Etruscan Museum. You all see Mucius. He's noted. He's a real great hero, in the sense that he was trying to assassinate an Etruscan king. That was in the 500 BC, before Rome became a great power. They were fighting, and the Etruscan was stronger then, so he was going to assassinate the king. But somehow he assassinated a double, and so he got caught and he was to be executed. But just before he got executed, he was known, at least legendary statement says that he put his hand, he said, before I die, I'm going to show you we Romans are brave. So there's this little thing that this file coming out for ceremonial purpose. He just put his hand there on the file. And he just said, look, I don't care. I can burn my finger and I'm willing to die, okay? And he just did that. This became legendary. The king was so impressed, he spared his life and sent him back, saying that you have suffered enough of the fire. And this is why it's become legendary. You find it, in all this museum. But there's another similar story. This famous Roman general, I forgot his name. He was known that whenever he went to a warfare, all his enemy would just run. They won't even fight him, because he was known that he can hold his sword, charge with his soldier, with few soldiers. He would charge with his hand burning, He was so brave, supernatural, okay? And so people just run away. Now I can tell you that I have answer for that. Both of them have propagation failure, okay? They don't feel it, okay? And we now have a medical term for it. It's called sclerosis, multiple sclerosis. That's what it is, okay? And in fact, so I've just shown you that this is, you can understand now this thing. It is nothing but just a CNN with the wrong parameter, okay? Now this is interesting, another story, true story, okay? In the United States alone, you may not realize, you may be shocked, but it's true. Over 1,000 lives are lost every day to sudden cardiac death. It's just not reported in the literature, in the newspaper. It's only 1 year by an athlete, some famous guy that dropped dead, and you see hear. But every day there are more than 1,000 lives lost. This is incredible. And they die by this, typically like this. On top is a normal heartbeat. This is the ECG, the electrocardiogram of a normal person. You and me would be something like on top, okay? And the period is about 1 second. That's our heartbeat. But people who are deceased or some defect in the heart would develop what's called ventricular fibrillation, which has become chaotic signal like that in the bottom. And of course, when you reach that state, your heart no longer can pump blood. The reason we can pump blood is because our blood are synchronized with the beating, it's periodic. So if any fibrillation more than 2 minutes will lead to sudden death. And in fact, there's a way to kill this, and that is if you put 2 electrodes with 5,000 volts onto his chest, within less than 2 minutes, if you put that, you'll be revived because it can kick you back into that normal heartbeat. This is why in all airplanes now, by law, there is this instrument, on every plane. You got, the stewardess were trained to save life like this. Put 5,000 volts on your chest, and you will be revived, and you behave normally. Now, why is that? What is happening is, it's now known, it's been known for more than 30 years, that there are spiral waves created under certain conditions in the heart. This is the real picture of a rabbit heart, not a human rabbit heart. And what's happening is that for the rabbit or this is now a human heart, okay? You're seeing here a typical EKG over 1 second, okay? But what's toward the end of that 1 second, there is a 1 millisecond, tiny interval of 1 millisecond, and there's a name for that. It's called vulnerable window. Vulnerable. You and I have that, by the way. Every one of us have that window. And that's very interesting, because if for whatever reason there is an electric spark, a tiny signal that happened to get ignited at exactly that time, that is like a shit for the spider web, and that's how spider web get started. That's why you can reset it, to get back away. So this situation, and then this is a real picture from a heart, of a rabbit heart. It's a beginning. Because of that onset, you have this spiral wave. And now the situation is just like you have a single revolver with 1,000 holes, but you have only one bullet. So let's play Russian roulette. You have one bullet. One of them became 1,000, 1 millisecond. One of them is going to kill you, okay? Because one of them will be at that time. This is just an imagination, okay? And so there's 1 in 1,000 chance that you and I would just drop dead. If indeed we have a signal, first you have to have a signal, generate a spark, and then it had to be that 1 over 1,000 interval, okay? And so we're all more vulnerable. So, but why is it that of course we have 1,000 people dying every day, but 1,000 is nothing. But you and I are still here, while we're not dead yet. In most sudden cardiac death episodes, the myocardium, which in the left ventricle was already diseased. You had to be already sick, maybe a hereditary disease, okay? But a similar dynamic progression can be initiated even in healthy hearts by a small electrical shock applied at the right time, at that vulnerable window, okay? Now, we have shown by simulation, by the way, about 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, the FDA had approved a drug, a wonderful drug for people that have heart attack. And that medicine, I forget the name, actually was so widely used because it actually prevents heart attack from there are various ways of dying from heart attack. But the most common way has been prevented by taking that magic medicine. But soon after that, people begin to find that this patient died too, eventually. But of some other, mechanism, not the one that the medicine to take cure of. Well, it turned out, and we've confirmed that we have used the CNN, the picture of the Chua circuit, remember, and we picked the parameter, and it turned out that if you have some defect, let's say the cellular resistor is not at the same value, a little bit off that, you are going to create a vulnerable window that is much wider. The normal one is only 1 millisecond. You can have a much wider that. We actually simulate and show that that's what happened. So that there's a much stronger chance of, especially if you have an inherited disease that can spark, say, a scar tissue, that quick keep generating sparks, you're much more likely to be within that much wider window. Okay, so we actually showed an explanation why that happened. Of course, the FDA realized that, and they banned that medicine. Okay, so most sudden death episodes begin with a regular rapid electrical rhythm in the myocardium. Prior synchrony of contraction then deteriorate to a short period incoherent, and failure of circulation quickly led to brain death, as I said. And as I just mentioned, several anti-arrhythmic drugs commonly prescribed for heart attack patients were recently banned by FDA after a clinical trial had revealed a 3-fold increase in the sudden cardiac death after it was shown that the drug can prolong the vulnerable window, widen it. We have used a CNN, like I just said, to confirm this phenomena and have analyzed the mechanism leading to the onset of dangerous spiral web in the heart. Okay. Now, the last example I will give you is, how many of you know force fields? If you, look at the Wikipedia, you will see what, this is interesting. Well, seeing stars is seeing force fields. They are the images generated within the eyes and the brain rather than by light from the outside. So force fields, in fact, are patterns of light and dark, patterns of light dark and color that you can see with no light suppression. So imagine you close your eyes, so there was no input. So this is why the CNN again, there's no B template. You have no input, no light coming in. You block out your eyes, okay? But you close both eyes and cup your hand over your left eye. With your right hand, push on your closed eyelid for several seconds. You may see any number of patterns. Pulsing, blood, flashes, lines, all kinds of things. In fact, when you go to bed tonight, just close, turn off the light and push your thing. You'll see phosphines, okay? I'm going to show you an example. That's one of them, And these are not repeatable. It's just all kinds of light patterns. For no input, remember, okay, you're closing your eye and the light is off. All close by eye, you see, and these are not repeatable. These are called phosphine. Now, there was an experiment conducted, by the way, by Professor Oster, that from University of Michigan some years ago, and he's a psychologist, so he's allowed to take LSD. Okay, so upon taking 75 micrograms of LSD, Professor Oster begins to hallucinate, and so he begins to see patterns, and he remembers them. So this is also in the name of science, so it's all okay, right? He's allowed to take LSD. And he published a paper, and he showed that some of those patterns that he had hallucinated, okay? And now I want to call your attention to this one, what I call a tunnel vision. There are many stories of tunnel vision, like people driving trucks at night, long haul, and they become bored, and they will develop tunnel vision. Or people that are near death and recover, they will report that they have seen, the tunnel to heaven, these are all called tunnel vision. So this has all been reported, okay? Now, here's the CNN. With that template on top, that will give you something that looks like that on the right, and I think you agree that looks like a tunnel vision, okay? And so this tunnel vision is nothing but just the chemistry, we're going to talk about reaction diffusion equation next week, and you will see that there's nothing you can understand by the different parameters. You can generate a template like that, and you will get tunnel vision. Okay, so this is an example of a hallucination pattern that's just generated by a template with 5x5 template. Okay, and in fact, here's the aside. But if you go to Palazzo Venezia in Venice, how many of you have been to this wonderful museum? A few of you. But next time you go to Venice, a beautiful city, go to this Palazzo, look for a triplet. In that there's a triplet, and I'll show you the triplet. This is one of the 3 of 1, but I want to show you this one because it has this tunnel vision on top with the 2 angels lying. I'm going to blow that up. Okay, that's the tunnel, and I think you agree that what I've just shown you is something similar to that, okay? And so what is the mechanism give rise to phosphines? What the mechanism is edge of chaos, which is the subject for next week. So you can see that I'm leading to, next week. All along, we're talking really all along is CNN and simple cells, but the simple cell had to be locally active, in particular, in all of this case where you are essentially in steady state, and suddenly you have something, you have to be on the edge of chaos. Okay, so let's now review. Early on, I say you have all these intimidating words. You have seen complexity, emergence, collective behavior, slaving endogenous, autopoietic. You have other terms, collective behavior, far from equilibrium. There are many more. Okay, now these are only intimidating because people didn't realize what it is, and thought that, especially people who publish papers are well-known people, so people pay attention. So I'm telling you now that all of these intimidating words are in fact just jargons, okay? They were manifestation. They were not the theory. They were just examples, anecdotes of the real thing, which is complexity that I just said. And that is the subject for next week, which is local activity in edge of chaos, where I will give you more examples. And then to give you, I had promised that I would not give you any proof, but I'll just give you some finally some equation to show you what it is, okay? Because I've been claiming that that this thing is constructive, that a sophomore can do it. I better show you that that's in fact true, okay? And because you can actually calculate and massage the parameter and tell you that I want something to happen, okay? And these are the warm-up reads for next week that you can recall by because this is going to be on the web if you want to read up. And this is the slide I showed you last week already. I will show it again because next week is the answer, okay? And so the reader, again, they say you had this one tiny village with only one barber who is quite eccentric, that he would have a rule hang up in front of the mirror, so that I would only shave any man who don't shave themselves. That's his rule. If you come in and he asks you a question, do you shave yourself? If you say yes, he say go out. So the question now, who shaved the barber? That's the question for next week. It's part of this answer. Okay. All right. So the encode for today is from our own Chinese philosopher, Zhuangzi. He said that consequently, he who to have right without wrong, order without disorder, does not understand the principle of heaven and earth. He does not know how things hang together. Now, with all these examples, and so to summarize, the whole thing is just CNN with very simple equation, and because the equation is mathematics, everything is explained by mathematics. So the real answer, and let me request on one slide there, the Galileo slide. That, in fact, should be is the answer. Can I have the Galileo? Galileo likes to say, the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. This is exactly the answer to everything here. In all of this pattern, it's not to be explained from chemistry principle or physics principle or economic principle. It is simply to understand that there is a simple principle of relativity, and that from there the equation would just give it to you, and you can argue because that's the truth. Mathematics, is whatever you say is 100% is true. Okay, all right. So I think I'm going to stop now, and thank you again for this first part of the lecture. I want to stop. My time is about up, and ask for pause for questions. And if there are no questions, we'll come back and I'm going to give you more details of these waves. And then toward the end, I'll show you a video that I think you will find it interesting. At least you will remember it. Okay. So thank you very much. Yes, question.
Yes. That's a very interesting talk. One definition of complexity is the minimum description length to describe a system. So a simple system, you just need one or two numbers to describe it. And a complex system, you need lots of elements to describe. And there's this thing called minimum description length. And under that definition of complexity, a lot of these patterns you've shown are actually simple systems because they only take a few numbers to describe to the state of the system. And that's why things like turbulent flow take huge numbers of numbers to describe them. So what do you think of that definition of complexity? Because to me, that seems like it has a very intuitive, it's not describing things in terms of unknown things. It seems like a reasonable definition to me.
Yeah. Well, turbulence certainly is complex. Is under the complexity subject. Okay. And what I've shown you here are all relatively simple examples that a simple CNN would emulate and produce, but turbulence is just another example, but it's more complex, and it's certainly heterogeneous Okay, and there is an equation that describes that in general. In fact, it's a Navier-Stokes equation. Okay, and so if you want to get into the real physics of the turbulence or the fluid dynamics, and I don't want to mislead anyone here to say that you don't have to have physics or anything at all. I'm just saying that it's not mysterious that you can have patterns, okay, and that there is not one specific reason that you have pattern, other than that you have pattern if your cells are locally active. The class of system that little turbulence, certainly the cells are locally active, but it is just so active that you need a much more detailed equation to try to get the detailed, dynamic insight. And I might add that equation I already mentioned last week has never been solved. It can never be solved, in fact. And it's one of the 7 $1 million prize put up by the Clay Institute in Boston. Anyone who can solve any one of those, I think 8 of those problems, will get this $1 million prize. And the Navier-Stokes is one of them. It's one of the hardest equations to solve. It is an equation that you need to solve to predict the weather. So all the prediction we get, of course, is with a truncation, because no supercomputer big enough can solve really Navier-Stokes equation without making at least some simplification. But Lorenz had already shown that a caricature of that with 3 equations already can produce chaos. So clearly weather is chaotic, which by definition has this hallmark of extreme sensitivity, which explains why you will never really be really able to trust weather prediction anything more than 2 or 3 days. You're going to have prediction up to, say, a week, but you cannot trust that. It's because the smallest perturbation could throw you off. And so that is certainly complexity. And so I'm not trying to make things simple. I'm just trying to say that you don't have to be intimidated that there are some really deep principles needed. Any one of those 20 names, need to understand, because those are all invented names that really have no definitions. Okay, and that the real reason, from the simplest example you have seen today to the turbulent, they all have to have components that have to be locally active. If it's not locally active, you will have homogeneity, the obvious solution. Okay, and when everything is identical, you expect solution to be all identical. And the only way you can have something is that the obvious solution has to become unstable. Local activity is the ingredient to destabilize that. That's really the main message, and that's what next week will be. Okay? Did I answer the question? Okay. Yes.
Hey, Liang, you show a lot of the patterns and its associated matrix. I just want to know, for this kind of patterns, which is made with the color and the pattern shape, how to correlate with
the pattern what?
The pattern, which is how to correlate those patterns with the number in the matrix.
Correlated?
Yeah, I mean, how can you elaborate a little bit more?
Oh, you mean how do I get those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, for the patterns, we show these all different patterns, right. But these patterns made with like a color and the shapes, right?
Pattern with color?
The color, you show the color evolving, like
the color.
Yeah. How do we correlate that with the number in the matrix?
Oh, those are just details, programming. Because those are continuous waveforms. So the voltage, these are, like I'm going to show you shortly, action potential. So you color, the level of things. So those are just color illustration. It's not fundamental. Yeah. Any other questions?
We got a question from
yes.
the. Oh, no.
You have a question?
I thought, okay. I think that the question that was being asked was given the matrix for the CNN.
Give me the template.
Yes, given the template for the CNN, can you predict what pattern that you get by inputting a particular number or changing a particular number in the pattern, in the template?
Well, yes and no. You can actually, the whole series of papers, and these are not mine, people have done that. You can actually use simple signal processing. You go to the frequency domain, you look at Fourier transform, you can predict that this is going to be hexagon pattern. You can predict that it's going to be this pattern and that you know, yes, there are papers about that, and not just for the CNN. You know, once you have the equation, you can linearize it, and you can actually see what kind of pattern it can support. Okay. Any other questions?
Question from the web, Leon?
Yes, please.
I think this may be actually the same question, but I don't think you've answered it yet. How do you determine the values in the CNN template to give specific results?
Well, there is not yet a specific algorithm because you don't know what you want, right? But the simple answer is most of this thing, as you will see next week, occurs in what I call a Goldilocks zone. So since we know how to calculate explicitly where is this edge of chaos region, that region is so small already, but if anything going to be interesting happen, it's going to be within that neighborhood. So you just do try and error. It's such a small region. You can see what you always different patterns. You must agree. You know, they're very different things, and yet we're talking about less than 10% of. So you just have to simply calculate where is the edge of chaos. And the good news is I have a procedure to do that. Okay, you give me your equation, I'll tell you how to calculate it. And it's something a sophomore can do. Any other question? Well, if there are no questions, I have about 16 minutes to give you some example. One of the examples I want to show you now is these are a one-dimensional action, okay? And I'm just going to show you the first three cells. You can see this action potential. And you can see they are identical. If you cut out one of them, this is the first cell, n equal to 1, the second cell, third cell, and more, you know. And what this picture shows you is that the waveform you see, whether it's just a 10 cells or a billion cells, or the cell all the way go to the moon, every waveform is identical. You can cut it out, you can superimpose, okay? So that's the first real picture to show you that that's the case. And, okay, what I've just mentioned earlier is this axon, okay? And every one of them is an identical action potential that you have already seen. But by the way, early on you have seen the first part of my lecture is all CNN with a 5x5 template, but it's CNN with the standard cell, the same cell that Toshiba used. So that's one class of example. The second class is the Chua circuit, which is in something simpler because the coupling is just the grid, resistive grid, and the Chua diode, the Chua circuit is the cell. And now, this is the third example, the class. I'm giving you three classes of example. They're all CNN. Now it's the Husky-Huxley is a cell. And this is the one-dimensional, okay, case. But you can see now the cells are all Husky-Huxley there, okay. And so this is the this is the real. So this is important interesting for you, I hope, because this is what your brain, my brain, have. If you were to believe Husky-Huxley equation, and most people do, at least that's a good approximation. This is our action, okay? And the reason if I put my hand on the file and I feel it, because this action potential will propagate to my pain center, okay? So now, by the way, so action potential propagating along actions are in fact one-dimensional outer waves. You have seen outer wave from the plane wave you know, the one with the propagation failure, to action potentials. They're all one dimension. These are one-dimensional outer waves. And now let's go to two-dimensional. So this is now the grid. And next week, by the way, we're going to come back here, and you will see that anything like this, where you have a grid, you have an equation that is called reaction diffusion. So the reaction diffusion is a very broad class equation. We will talk about next week. But today I'm just giving you the result. Okay? So you have all these identical resistors, identical cells. The last 15 minutes, the cells are Chua circuit. Now the cells are going to be Husky and Huxley equation. That's the only difference. So everything is really simplified, it's unified. You know, I mean, we have a principle here. Okay? And you have a collection of cells. You have you have interaction locally, the coupling, and then the cell is locally active. And then something interesting happens. Okay? So now we have the Husky and Huxley cells embedded in this grid. And now if you look at the first top line, I'm going to label the two cell number 1 and 2. And then that is the action potential. You will see 1 and 2, the red and the blue. If you go to the second diagonal, you see 3 and 4 cell, okay? And that's the corresponding, the red and blue, the second in the middle are the action potential. And third is in the third row, 5 and 6. And the point of this is that whether you have a line, you have a grid, or you're in 3 dimension, the waveform at one node, all in our brain, they're all identical. The only difference is they have a shift in phase. Just that's all. Okay, and because of that, you can get. These are now a more detailed simulation but now you have seen this before. But this is now the real McCoy. This is from the Huxley equation. This is what your brain and my brain would support. Okay, because we're using the Huxley equation and using his parameter. So something that at least we can trust, okay? Whereas the spiral you've seen earlier is from Chua circuit, which is hypothetical. Now we start from top to bottom. The time snapshot of time is given. The initial condition is just a ball in the center. And you can see it evolves, go up and down. It begins to curve around and begin to become clockwise, and that's a spiral wave, okay? And but if this is the one on the left. I'm just summarizing. On the left, if you pick an initial pattern like that on the left, on top, you will get a spiral wave. If you pick the initial pattern like in the middle, you will actually get 2 spiral waves, but they are in opposite direction. You see that? And this is interesting. This is important for people in doing chemistry because it's called chirality. You know, all our amino acids is left-handed, and the sugar molecules are all right-handed. You know, it's interesting in chemistry. You know, that's what called chirality. It's symmetrical, but they are left and right-handed. You can see that this is one of the sources of that reason. And toward the last lecture, you will see more about chirality. So we're talking a lot about symmetry as well. This is a kind of symmetry. Now the third row is the same initial condition as the one in the middle, except it's shorter. So it's short enough that you can see that it connects toward, and so it becomes a concentric, a target wave. So the target wave and the spiral wave really from the same fiber. It's just a matter of picking the right initial condition. That's the moral of this. Now, if you pick the 2 initial conditions on a little bit farther apart and go down and follow, you can see that you get a more target wave, but a little bit more elongated. Okay, and now this is interesting. I told you that when the outer waves, 2 branches collide, they don't sort of reflect or form interference pattern. They just annihilate. This is a millisecond snapshot. You can see exactly what's happening. You go from left to right. Just go scan it. You know, you can see how this is from 259.0 to 259.1, 2.2. So we have very, very tight snapshot. It's evolving. You can see now finally making contact. They begin to kiss at the end, okay? At the lower right end, and then continue. Finally, you know, they make contact and they continue, and this is how it's going, and eventually it finally separated, and finally the third one, this happened. This is the mechanism, how these things are annihilated in all of this collision thing. And in my last lecture, when I come back, I'm going to have another way of showing similar thing, but I just want to show you that you please try to reflect today, because the last lecture will be again hypothetical, you know. But this is the real McCoy. This is in your brain, my brain. Unfortunately, in our brain, in our heart, all the things that we know so far about auto waves they're destructive. It leads to catastrophe. You got sudden death, okay? And the one in the brain that we know that have been found are those that lead to epileptics, you know. And because but there are now recent works which seem to show that the brain actually used spiral waves to make massive signal processing, but there's not much progress at all, because the only way how can you take those data? You know, the reason we know about epileptics is because people open the skull and actually put electrode and found that they are spiral waves. This is why, you know, we haven't got to know, but for sure the spiral wave. In fact, there was some measurement about when you sleep tight. You know, you were just going to sleep. There were measurements recently published showed there were spiral waves. There must be a reason that, because one hypothesis is that spiral wave is something that spreads out. So if you want to communicate with a lot of neighbors to do some processing, you need that kind of a communications system. No one knows, okay? Right now, all we know is that we are inherited with this phenomena. Spiral wave is robust phenomenon. Even the galaxy, the hurricane, they're all spiral waves. They're destructive in some sense, okay? But it's a natural phenomenon. And I think the engineers can start to explore now that you know spiral, maybe they get some use made out of it. So far, it has been a phenomena to explain things you don't understand, okay? And now I'm going to move on. More of the same thing, but since the time is running out, can I have that last slide that I show you? And then I'm going to show you a video. Okay, this is a typical spiral wave. And remember, every point, if you look at one cell, it's the action potential. Every action potential is same. But why is it you're seeing something that's doing rotating when everything is independent? And I think if you will understand, if I show you the next two slides, the next slide, follow that, next one. Okay, all of you have been to this barber shop, and you have seen this rotating thing. You see things moving, right? But if you look at one point, this left and right is just 1 second apart, okay? You can see this thing is traveling down. Rotate up 180 degrees, you begin to see that this thing is rolling in the right direction of a wave. If you look carefully, every point, say at one point in there, is the same point, going around and around, you know? It's just that what you're seeing, this movement is actually an illusion. This is what actually outer waves are, you know? Because every point is just an action potential. It's just that every one of them is so phase-shaped in such a way that in the overall effect, you feel that thing is going on. Okay, I have 5 minutes. I'm going to show the video now. This video, will show you different things that I've said already, but it gives you a better feeling of the real thing in time. So can I have the video, which will be about exactly the time left. So here's a propagation of action potential. You can have action potential. These are all Huxley. So this is real. This is what you have, okay? Our brain can generate action potential typically like that with one pulse. But we have found that you can also have different parameters of Huxley equation. You can have 2 pulses. So you can have 2 pulses, a pocket bud will be propagating. You can have 3 pulses. In fact, you can have any number of pulses. We have just developed all these results that we have not published it yet. This is now an example of 3 pulses. Again, these are Hodgkin-Huxley. This is what your brain and my brain can produce. Three processes. Now I'm going to show you the collision of two waves. So imagine two waves coming, they collide. No reflection, okay? You've seen it early on, but this is not the real motion. So that when they touch, you now have a target wave. See, it's now a ring. It's an elongated ring in this demonstration. And once when they get to the boundary, it just disappears. No reflection, no flashback. This is all in your brain and my brain. This you know, we have this dynamic that would do all of this thing. So far everything has been sort of projected on the plane. Now this is a three-dimensional view. The XY are the plane, the array is an XY. So you show you now a much clearer view where the voltage is the upper axis and XY is the array, 100 by 100 array of neurons. This is the last one. See the collision that you saw earlier, but now in motion.